Good morning. Chapter 7, Lecture C. This will be the final lecture for Chapter 7. I'll be wrapping it up um, today. So, yesterday we ended off talking about the ratification of the Constitution and the Federalists and extending the fear. So you're going to have the Anti-Federalists who were the opponents of ratification, and they believe this shifted the balance too far to the government. They did lack coherent leadership. You're going to see mostly individuals that would have their power infringed upon, such as the bigger states. Small farmers did not like this either because they thought the strong central government would hurt them, and ultimately the Bill of Rights would be promised for ratification. I think I did that slide yesterday. Yeah. Okay, now moving on to We the People. So the national identity. Though the Constitution opens with We the People, does not include all people. There are three groups that it really excludes. Other persons equal slaves. Indians were independent tribes and not part of the American body politic group. And then the people, the only group that were entitled to freedom were free white men or white men that had the ability to control their own destiny. Now, I will say this, though people say, well, excludes slaves and Indians and even some degree women, it does open up a broader sense of freedom for common white men, which did not exist in Europe at the time. Though today we think it is narrow, it was far more open at that period than any other government in the world. We the people too. Indians in the new nation. The relationship with slaves and Indians showed that conflicting principles that shaped American nationality were obviously conflicted in. The idea to extend freedoms to the Indians or enslaved people was not heavily considered. National government wanted to promote westward expansion, and that would come at the cost of Native Americans. Meant three things for the Indians: move farther west, total disappearance, and incorporation into American society. So they really had three options, and this is what ultimately many would move west against their own will. Many would die from disease, conflicts of whites, and then some would incorporate into the American society. And then they would create a unique element. Even though Westerns are highly inaccurate, they do show you that, Indians that worked with frontiersmen, often married into families and such, though that was not heavily accepted. A lot of Indians would assimilate in the local societies. In 1791, Little Turtle, leader of the Miami Confederacy, inflicted a humiliating defeat of American forces on the frontier. In 1795, some 1,003 federal troops defeated Little Turtle's forces at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. This led to the Treaty of Greenville, in which 12 Indian tribes seceded most of the Ohio and Indian area, or Indiana, to the U.S. government. Also established the annuity system, yearly grants federal money to Indian tribes to keep them a little bit of peace, pay for their land indirectly. But either case, after Fallen Timbers, Indians are going to realize they're going to be facing a much more difficult battle than they realized initially. Jefferson rejected the idea as Indians were inherently inferior to white Americans, at a less advanced state of civilization. Though he is skewed in some of that, he's thinking he did believe they could come be full members of the Republic if they abandoned their communal ways, land holding and hunting in favor of small-scale farming, and basically become Americanized. Though Jefferson was much more tolerant of Indians and their ways, he was fascinated by them. You can still see his white supremacy feeling, and whites are superior, and just the idea that the white race as a whole has a better system. Congress also authorized Washington to distribute agricultural tools and livestock to Indians to make them assimilate. Goal was to resemble Europeans. Most Indians rejected this, though, but the idea here was, hey, let's make them more like us, which obviously they did not necessarily like. We the people. Blacks and the Republic. By 1790, blacks far exceed the Indian population with the United States. Like I said, the Indian population is skewing way down. Nowhere in the original Constitution does it define what a citizen of the United States is, and it won't be till the 14th Amendment do we define what an individual is. Individual states were left to free to determine the boundaries of liberty, thus why African Americans are going to be denied many, many, many rights, especially in the South. The North's gradual Emancipation Acts assumed the former slaves would remain in the country. Letters from an American farmer coined the term melting pot. However, this did not mention blacks. This is going to refer to more Scotch, Irish, English, Western Europeans. Naturalization Act of 1790 offered only citizenship to free white persons, excluding many other nationalities from around the world. Blacks will not get this until 1870. Asians not to 1940. Native Americans not till 1924. So you can see that the whole naturalization and citizenship and rights will take generations to expand. And the Asians have the longest path till they're accepted, and that's the 1940s. We the People Forum. Jefferson, Slavery and Race. Man's liberty, John Locke had written, flowed from his having reason. To deny liberty to anyone, to those who were not considered rational beings, did not seem to be a contradiction. Though the natural rights, as Locke has stated, was from people of reason, logic, understood stuff. So people, if they didn't understand this, thus they didn't have these rights inherent. So that's where a lot of Americans like Jefferson would argue that Locke's principle did not apply to all people. Jefferson was obsessed with the connection between heredity, environment, race, and intelligence. He also hoped that no one would permanently be deprived, but believed blacks might be. So Jefferson had the hope that everyone could be advanced and move forward, especially the Indians. He really was fascinated by Indians, but he ultimately believed blacks would not advance for whatever reason. He did believe that all men were destined to be free, but he also wanted a homogeneous citizenry with common experiences, values, and inborn abilities. Some did assume blacks could assimilate, but ultimately Jefferson did not hold that viewpoint. The point of this is, as we move into the early 1800s and looking at the Constitution, when this American Revolution is still going on and there's changes to the Constitution and things going on, blacks, Indians, and even Asians are going to be struggling to have any sense of liberty. Now, the principles of freedom: decline of apprenticeship and indentured servitude narrowed the freedom among whites. It also widened for blacks and slavery, meaning whites that are going to be deprived is going to shrink. And I alluded to this earlier, where whites are the first time white men, common or rich, are going to have many rights, where Native Americans and blacks is going to shrink, where they're more narrow-minded. Race played more an important role and was convenient. It was an easy way to keep people down and expand rights for one, but also at the cost of others. So as we conclude this chapter, the end of Lecture 7, the biggest things I want you to understand is the new document that was created with the Constitution is a great document. It is very fascinating to study, to look through and read it. I'm actually reading it right now in my American government class. It is limited in some scopes. It doesn't incorporate everything. There is flaws, but at the end of the day, the way they wrote it created a system in which you have three branches that are balanced. You have some compromises worked out, though obviously some of them were not great, like the 3/5, but a document that is actually pretty amenable to go forward and adapt to a very changing world. And from it, we will create a country today, I mean, even with all our flaws, that is the most free, the most talked about country in recent history. We have a system that, though we have issues today, really had never been seen before or even seen again in the world. And that's what's unique about the American Constitution. And, you know, is there issues? Yes, but what we created was radical, and it's still shaping the world, good and bad. And I don't know what the future holds on it. And just looking at even back then, they didn't know either. And that's kind of the fun thing that we will get to explore more of. Have a good day.